Hello everybody and welcome along to this video, which is Mr. Johnson Teaches a Christmas Carol, focusing on the importance of Christmas, part of a series of videos I've put together exploring the AO3 the context surrounding the novella, part of your GCSE English Literature. It's paper 1 section B, making it one of the first exams that you will sit, and certainly your first English exam. So without further ado, let's move on. Please be ready to take notes as you're watching this as well. Really important, not just to listen but to write information down as well, so you've got it to refer to later and also to revise from later as well. So moving on then, AO3 Context. This is one of the assessment objectives. It's one of the things that you are marked for when you are writing your response to A Christmas Carol. It's the circumstances form the setting that goes around the text, so it basically makes your understanding that little bit broader. It shows that you understand a little bit more quite why the text was written, but also where it came from and what was happening at the time. So in this sense, the context for A Christmas Carol, it includes the understanding of the significance of Christmas and also those customs as well, some of which you will be very familiar with ourselves, some of which maybe not so much. So let's move on then and have a look. Christmas time as we know it today, well, I mean, that picture has some things that might be familiar to us as well, but this is certainly a very Victorian Christmas you're looking at here. But I must point out as well that this is certainly a Christmas for the wealthier in society. Some of these things would be featured in the Christmases of those who are less fortunate and have less money, but maybe not so much. But certainly the Christmas tree, the idea of family coming together there as well, the colours, the reds, the greens that you see there, the decorations, the idea of giving presents. There are so many customs that we associate today with Christmas that actually have their origins in a Victorian Christmas, and also can be linked to Charles Dickens, who was given credit for popularising the Christmas as we know it. So Christmas time then, well, the novella A Christmas Carol is part of the rebirth of the celebration of Christmas. Rebirth coming back because it had actually been in decline for a long time. By the start of the 1800s, which is about 40 years before A Christmas Carol, the medieval traditions which we sometimes associate with, they've been dying off basically. People hadn't been shown so much interest. Things like the idea of singing Christmas carols had fallen out of favour, to use that as an expression. And really, it wasn't a Christmas that was such an important thing for people, maybe you could say. Now, in the 1840s, Prince Albert marries Queen Victoria. She's the one who gives her name to the Victorian era. And Albert, one of the things that was actually featured in Germany at this time as well, was the idea of bringing a fir tree inside your house and decorating the fir tree, as we call it, the Christmas tree, and he was the first to do that. And that was one of the things which people liked to copy themselves. If the royal family were doing it and it was good enough for them, then we certainly wanted to be like that royal family, and people started doing that. And that was one of those steps towards actually reinvigorating and reinventing the idea of Christmas. Now, Dickens also loved Christmas. He really was somebody who enjoyed that time of year, and he reintroduced many of our romantic ideas of Christmas. And by romantic, I mean things that we look back on fondly, things that sort of paint a real vivid picture of Christmas for us. And for a long time afterwards, he called this himself the carol philosophy. So like the singing of carols is something that you see in A Christmas Carol, even down to the fact that they are called staves rather than chapters is an important thing to note there as well. And many other things which we're going to have a look at shortly were sort of reintroduced by the book, and the book went on to be enormously popular, and people almost wanted to mimic those ideas themselves, and then we start getting this idea of a rebirth. So let's start with the idea of decorations, and in brackets though I've put about family, because that's something which brings the family together as well. Decorating a Christmas tree, not necessarily in the way that you might think about it today with electric lights and maybe tacky ornaments being put up on there, but natural decorations would have been used, particularly things like evergreens they're called. So plants which don't lose their leaves in winter, because of course Christmas is a season, it happens in the season of winter, so there aren't many trees with leaves left on, but holly, ivy and fir trees, which are linked to the idea of Christmas trees, those are things which very much would feature. During the the third stave, and you've got the ghost of Christmas present, and Scrooge walks into his room with a ghost there, and it's decorated like wealthy decorations, beautiful decorations, but what's all around, it talks about living green hanging around the room. So that's something that people used to do, and it's something we still associate. Think about holly and the green leaves and the berries, we still associate associate that with Christmas. And they used to put candles on their tree, which absolutely could be seen as an enormous fire hazard and very difficult to do. But yes, candles used to be a traditional decoration on trees, and they used to represent stars. Now, stars link into the idea of heaven because this is a religious celebration, but also stars when the wise men were following the star which led them to Jesus. So it really does have sort of some very spiritual connotations. Another thing which brings family together as well is the idea of sitting down and having food and eating a meal together. Christmas meals really were common, and they became more so as well. This idea of having a day off for Christmas to recognise the birth of Jesus and sit down together as a family and to show your gratitude. Now, things to point out as well, that the Cratchits, who are employed by Scrooge, or Bob Cratchit's employed by Scrooge, they sit down and they have their Christmas meal. And one of the things it really focuses on, apart from their goose, is they have potatoes and apples. Just to point out as well that potatoes and apples were cheap foods because they are easy to grow and they could be grown in this country, unlike something like oranges, which you do see but would have had to be imported from abroad. So just worth pointing out, and the Cratchits make their food go that little bit further by eating potatoes and apple sauce alongside it. But the other thing they do eat, of course, is a goose, which you see there, a roast goose. I asked many of my classes, what do you eat on Christmas Day? A majority of people will often say turkey. But why turkey, and why do the Cratchits end up eating goose? Well, goose is a cheap form of meat. Goose was cheaper, and I'll tell you why here as well, a little fact for you. Turkey costs more because turkeys can't walk very far. Geese come from farms, and those farms and the farmers would then walk their geese from the outskirts of the cities and walk them into the centre where they'd be slaughtered, and then they'd be ready for their meat, after they'd been plucked, of course. So geese are cheap, like you see in the picture there. They could actually be herded and walked towards market, as it's called, whereas turkeys couldn't. They're bigger birds, their feet don't support them so easily, so therefore the Cratchits have goose, but also at the end they have a turkey bought for them by Scrooge, almost a wealthier gift that he gives to the family. So a little fact there for you. Also worth pointing out as well, it's a reference to this in the Stave 3 as well, that families didn't have their own ovens, or certainly the poorer families wouldn't. If you look at the idea of an oven, it's a big thing, it's an expensive thing, and we're talking about people who cook on fire, so they would regularly boil their food, which is quite an easy thing to do with a pot over a fire, but you can't roast something over a fire, not as easily certainly, so therefore what they would have to do is they would have to take all their meat to a local baker's to be cooked. So on days like Christmas Day, where the bakers weren't selling bread, people would pay and they would go and cook their food inside the baker's ovens, and the Cratchits again do that. The young Cratchits come running back excitedly, saying that they could swear that they smelt their goose cooking in the baker's oven. Whether they could or not is another matter. But over the shoulder, this is a modern photo, but over the shoulder of that man there, you can maybe see the fire, so the fire would be there on the side, and that's how it would heat the oven. So another thing which brought families together as well, which you see inside the novella, is parlour games. Parlour games. Now the parlour is meant to be a room within inside the house that you would go to once you'd eaten your food. You go into a different room and you play games, maybe card games, but all sorts of other traditional games as well. So Scrooge's nephew Fred, he invites Scrooge over on Christmas Day, and that's what Christmas is about. Many of you will spend time with family on Christmas, at Christmas time I should say, because that's the idea. Christmas is about meeting up with people and spending time together, and games are a great way of doing that. So parlour games were common, but they're also fun, and they're very much free as well. Didn't involve huge amounts of equipment or anything. So games like the yes-no game, where you ask questions, somebody thinks of something and you're only allowed to ask yes or no questions until you work it out. Blind Man's Buff is often a traditional one from children's parties. Charades is another one. There's all sorts of different ones. This one in the photo is a new one to me, I'll be honest with you, but it certainly seems like this person has to try and blow out the candle while blindfolded. Yep, cheap, easy and free. There are all sorts of ones available, and it brings the family together, as I said, sharing and fun, and that's something that you see Scrooge joins in with. When the ghost takes him to see Fred's Christmas, Scrooge refused to go to it, and they go and see the ghost, the Christmas present with Fred, and that they're playing these sorts of games, and they're having fun together, and it's uniting the family. Also think about Christmas as a time for giving, of course. So although we often now associate it with presents, particularly when you're a kid and you just love the idea of waking up and opening your presents, it's actually about the idea of giving to one another and showing kindness towards each other and thinking about other people. And one way of thinking about them is buying them a small gift which actually shows kindness and shows that you've thought of them. Fred and Fezziwig are two characters who both really embody this spirit of generosity at this time of year. The photo, or so I say, the sketch, the engraving that you see in the background there is actually of Father Christmas going around in a chariot and actually giving out presents. It's a Victorian interpretation of Father Christmas. You can certainly see the parallels between him and the Ghost of Christmas Present. But Scrooge finally does demonstrate this at the end, in the final stave, when actually he does give the turkey to the Cratchits in order to support Tiny Tim, ultimately as well, to prevent him from dying. But also when the charity men, he sees the charity men on Christmas Day, and he actually, we don't know exactly what, but he does make a donation to the charity men as well. So once again, reinforcing this idea that Christmas is a time for giving and a time for thinking of others, as Fred said in the opening, about fellow passengers to the grave, and actually all working together. So Christmas, an important theme in A Christmas Carol, of course. The name is in the title of the novella, but also something which really is the spirit that runs through it. Here are some recap questions for you to have a go at to test your understanding. I'll thank you and say well done for making it all the way to the end of this short video. There are other videos on my channel to check out, of course, which hopefully will support you with A Christmas Carol and also other elements of your English. Thanks for watching, everybody. Good luck when it comes to your exams, and goodbye.